the steps, and they are from different arms of services. That's your Air Force, Navy, the SA Army, and the military health services. Those are where the step comes. What you see there is our national ceremonial guard band that is leading the guard.
So they are leading the procession.
Yeah, look, they are the different bands that are present who are leading the street lining. Those are the bands from the different provinces as I've mentioned. Now the ceremonial band is leading the ceremonial guard to the precincts here in front of.
Can you explain the difference in their dressing code? You see the ones in front are dressed in red, which is the ceremonial card, and the ones at the back actually dressed on a different color. What is the difference there?
What you see there is the band will be dressed in that attire, the orange, and then the guard itself is the ones that are dressed in that green.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the airwaves of VSC, of course, streaming to you live this evening on Facebook and in YouTube as well. We're still coming to you live from the parade, which of course has become Parliament Precinct, and this, of course, for the what is known as the OPA, or Opening of Parliament Address, not to be confused with SONA, the State of the Nation Address. And tonight, of course, the country comes together around the television for, I think, what's another family meeting. This, of course, for the first time seeing South Africa, a country that has been brought together by various political parties joining the what is termed the GNU, the Government of National Unity. So this first sitting will, of course, signify a new dawn in South Africa, and whether or not that's positive or negative is something being debated by analysts right now. What you're seeing is the South African Guard or Presidential Guard getting ready to do their thing. You might see that on the screen right now. Starting to get a little bit dark in the CBD, of course, because it's winter. Fortunately, the weather has shifted and it's not raining. We were expecting these people to be soaking wet, but nonetheless, alhamdulillah, the weather's turned out quite nicely. Also, as you can see on our screens right now, while things are underway, we are at about it's 17 minutes past 6 now, so about 30 or 43 more minutes before we do get underway with the actual proceedings and the speech, which will be happening at 7 o'clock. President Cyril Ramaphosa will be addressing the nation. We'll continue to keep coverage of this event as it unfolds. You're welcome to check out our YouTube, check out our Facebook, as well as also check out the TikTok and Instagram as we bring you live coverage. We've spoken to a number of notable personalities, and we'll continue to do so throughout this broadcast. Of course, as we recognize, we are currently experiencing the seventh democratically elected government in South Africa. And quite interestingly today, of course, internationally recognizes Mandela Day or Madiba Day, the 18th of July, the birthday of President Nelson Mandela. But while we reflect on that, also an opportunity for us to think about the fact that as much as we are thinking about new beginnings, we also recognize and realize that throughout South Africa, there are still some challenges that remain, or actual fact, many challenges remain from an economic, a social, political point of view. And it becomes important for us as citizens to take a keen interest in what the president is going to say tonight, because that sets the tone for policy, that sets the tone for the budget speech. The budget speech is the real speech that ultimately determines the course of the country from an economic point of view. I'm back with Mr. MJ Lee, Mohammed Junaid Shafika. Mohammed Junaid, I'm just reflecting on the fact that as much as this is an important moment, everyone else in the auntie is thinking already about the budget speech that is to come, because that sets the tone economically and socially for the country. People know that government has been tightening their spending in certain areas, and will the president be alluding to those measures this evening?
You're absolutely right, Fasih. The budget speech is what we should be extremely cognizant of. This is merely the opening of Parliament address, but we're using the word merely here not to derail, detract from the importance of the OPA. But yeah, that is extremely key. Speaking to a number of ministers in the week and then also on PM Drive a bit earlier, we got sentiments from them, the budget allocation for the medium term, perhaps not what they were hoping to be the case, etc., etc. But yeah, we should definitely be cognizant of one, the opening of Parliament address, but secondly, as you rightfully mentioned, the budget speech, which will obviously follow a bit later. And I think what is interesting, speaking to some of the new ministers in the cabinet, Minister Patricia de Lille, talking about R1 billion actually that the tourism sector actually invests in recognizing the fact that South Africa should be a destination of choice. And then, getting some interesting comments from Dr. Peter Groenewald, who was talking about what he has in plan or the plans that he wants to set in motion for correctional services. Certainly a different take for the correctional services portfolio as perhaps what we've become accustomed to in South Africa.
One of the things that I picked up that he was saying is that he wants to get more professional people on board those parole boards, and he wants to professionalize the outfit a little bit. And I think on the one side, one also realizes and recognizes that rehabilitation of the people who are coming out of prison is of utmost importance, and you want to be able to put the minds at work there and people at work there who understand the aspect of is it criminology, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes, yes.
I can't get to the term right now. And the reality of South Africa is that there are many offenders coming back into South Africa to society that do offend again. And we want to know what the challenges are and how we can rehabilitate people and give them a better chance and a better start, and also make society safer. The other thing also is prison reform is a big issue.
Mm.
It's something that I think we've neglected for a long time in this country. Really looking at how we take this matter forward, and at the end of the day, prison, many people in our community would say, is a place that people should not want to be. But there are those who feel comfortable in prison, who find camaraderie and friendship in prison. And so when you have a person that does not fear the prison system, what kind of a deterrent is prison, as far as crime is concerned? And so, yeah, those are the things that I think definitely, bears looking at. But one thing also, that don't you think that with this new cabinet, this new vision that South Africa is gazing upon in terms of the government of national unity, it's an opportunity for those parties who have constantly been criticizing the ruling party,
yes.
for them now to put their skin in the game and to see what they would have, how they would have shaped South Africa differently within the various portfolios. And I want to know at the end of all of this, if we are still going to be saying that we could have done it better, because the reality is in a country like South Africa, not everything that we've experienced has been political. Some of it has been economic.
Very true. We've heard over the years how vociferous the DA has been as the official opposition. Now they are within the ranks of the government of national unity, and they would be a party to decision making and that process. So certainly, I believe the Democratic Alliance will be under increasing pressure also, because now you're not being vociferous in the opposition benches anymore. Now you are part of the process of making decisions, ensuring execution of change. I think more so the DA will be watched. And I think looking at the dynamic of our opposition benches now, the official opposition, they've classified themselves as the Progressive Caucus, comprising of MK Party, the EFF, ATM, and the National Coloured Congress. I think that's going to be very interesting. Many are saying that the MK Party would prefer to negotiate with the ANC minus President Cyril Ramaphosa. So once he is out of the picture, they prepared to play the game and look at the game realistically. Whether or not that is going to happen will only be a matter of time. It does seem unlikely, but I think the official opposition, their role that they are going to play, because once again we reflect back on the fact that MK Party and the EFF practically garnered close to 25% of the tallied votes and the official votes on May 29. So deep down inside, I believe they will still feel aggrieved. They did convene a press conference earlier, the Progressive Caucus, and Julius Malema was very vociferous, saying that this essentially is not a government of national unity. This is practically handing the country over to capitalism and neoliberalism, and they will wait to see how far this leads the country.
I think one of the big things that will people will watch very carefully is the level and escalation of privatization within institutions. Again, I always come back to this matter of privatization because it hits our pockets. The moment we take resources and we start putting it in the hands of businesses that themselves have no compassion for sub-economic communities. It's merely about profit and profit for the sake of an organization or company to flourish. And so the reality of that is, as much as we are looking for efficiency, what are we sacrificing in terms of the ordinary person and making things less and less affordable? So I think a point that perhaps if opposition parties are honest about this, is they'll keep an eye on the matter of privatization. If they truly are saying they're fighting for the underdog and the ordinary man. The other thing also that I think is very key and clear about this is that when we look at President Cyril Ramaphosa's speech tonight, South Africans are looking for something different than they have, for the last 10 years. I think South Africans are looking for a new vision, a uncharted territory, perhaps, of course, with a mixture of people in government, but looking towards creating a stable environment for the economy, a stable environment for growth, and of course, being able to work together. And let's hope he can comment on how he's going to strategize and working together with other political parties now in government, sharing power with him.
Fasira, I believe it's no coincidence that the opening of Parliament address coincides with Mandela Day. Whether it is for us politically to romanticize about that day when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. He was brought to the parade. There were hundreds of thousands of people. Some of us, like you and I, we were little kids back then. And he stood outside City Hall on top. And he practically, and for me personally, that was the first of perhaps what could have been classified as the authentic democratic State of the Nation address, where he was just released and he spoke to the hundreds of thousands that gathered here. And I think that was key. But for it to coincide, the OPA to coincide with Madiba Day, with Mandela Day, is it for us to be romanticized by that political history that we experience? Or should we be cognizant as South Africans and mindful that, look, an administration has not really done for the country what it should have done? The track record is not that good. So should we be mindful of that and saying, like, here's our opportunity as South Africans, we're going to hold you accountable?
You speak about that, and South Africans, some were inspired and some were irate about the example of Tenswalo, used in the last State of the Nation address by the president to kind of, ahead of the elections, carve this rosy picture of South Africa. And then some other political entities, some other opposition parties decided to examine this and say, well, let's look at the reality of South Africa right now, and let's look at what Tenswalo would actually be experiencing in the face of load shedding, in the face of an economic decline, and all of these things. And people might say, well, it's a war of narratives, but the reality is that as much as we would like to, progress within a society where we all feel warm and fuzzy about 1994, we've seen a decline in the economy. We've seen
Definitely.
massive job losses. We've seen xenophobia and these things, and to a certain degree, many people might say that these matters, these dark spots in South Africa's history have not yet been addressed. And so the reality of that is when the president comes out and fails to really address those matters, those issues, those prime issues, how do you then take seriously his hope and his optimism?
Mm. I think the conversation which we had with Fadil Adams a bit earlier, he packed no punches, MP and president of the National Coloured Congress. And he was saying, just look at the abbreviation GNU, Government of National Unity. It's actually GUN, GUN. So this is not a hostile takeover of our economy and of our administration. It's being done in a very polite way. These are his views, obviously. And I'm sure these are practically the views of the rest of the members that make up the Progressive Caucus. But I think one thing that is positive is that the brown child, the colored community that has become disenfranchised, that has been overlooked for a very long period of time by the ruling administration, including the DA, even in the province. We have to be very honest. Here would be an opportunity where, although perhaps from the opposition bench's perspective, but at least there's a start in as far as representation of the colored child and the brown child is concerned.
Well, I think some people would look at it in different ways. Some people might say, has the brown child never been represented within government?
Mm.
We have had a government that's been was comprised of various communities.
Mm.
Going into 1994, we had what was termed as at that time as a government of national unity, but in essence, it was a transitional government. With certain chess pieces and certain moves made to make the transition more easy and more palatable, I think, in a society that was so divided. But if we really look at what we're saying, my question is, we do understand that political parties speak to different communities, but when we take a narrow view of communities, in spite of the country as a whole, and this is something that many people have spoken on. Even these political parties admit to say that we understand that our view is narrow.
Mm.
But the reality is that you're in government, you're only going to serve the interests of a specific group of people. And we ask the question that are we not all South Africans?
Yes.
So as much as we understand that the importance of focusing on the brown child is important, when do we stop being the brown child and all the other
Just
colours
South
and rainbow
African.
and become South Africans?
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, we have a government of national unity comprised of different political theorems and different different people from different walks of life. So they already represent a diverse country.
Mm.
So how do we tap into that instead of looking at specific interest groups that
And
might
we then compartmentalize ourselves.
exactly.
But now, Fasik, talking about that, I think what is very important as we see images of the economic freedom fighters in their bright red overalls. But I think talking about the economic freedom fighters and perhaps the perspective of the National Coloured Congress, some would argue, as you said, we compartmentalize ourselves and we then move away from the greater good that we are South African. Essentially, when the EFF launched as a party and as a movement 10 years ago, 10 years later, they perhaps not as radical as they were purported to be 10 years ago. And it was all practically based on black consciousness and the ideal of the African. But now, 10 years later, the EFF talks about maturity and perhaps going to approach a constructive dialogue, not to be disruptive. And we've even seen within their ranks now that it's a diverse South African makeup within the EFF as well. So I think they've also started learning over the years that it's not just a certain culture, denomination, or sector in South Africa that we're going to have to represent. It's about all of us, the collective.
As I say this, I obviously see, and we can see on our screens, the motorcade and the president making his way to what is now Parliament Precinct. But to go back to that issue of looking at a example of the EFF, and I think many political parties even the PA and others have realized to a certain degree that you have to be more inclusive in terms of your message and in terms of your representation in your party, because at the end of the day, everyone is playing a numbers game in politics. And the reality of that is we want to see that we can reach as many people as possible without being exclusionary.
Mm.
And we've seen people from all walks of life enter the EFF, enter the PA and other parties. But the reality of that is, does the central message and central narrative around race change or not? I think that's the thing that South Africans are watching, because as much as we identify with a call for oppressed people to be raised up and lifted up, there is the thing about saying that at the end of the day, while we're building on the one side, we're also maintaining. We want to maintain relationships across across the electorate, in the sense.
Mm.
And the reality I think that South Africans are facing is that sometimes we ask the question: are we still voting along racial lines as South
Mm.
Africans after 1994, after 30 years of democracy? And should we be still voting along racial lines when the issues that face us as South Africans are South African issues?
I think what I found to be very interesting, and it kind of showed me already the type of diversity we have transitioned into as a nation. I battled with voting on the day because we were broadcasting at the IEC
Aina, Aina.
Western Cape Result Center at Century City. And Anika kind of like came to me. She said, "Okay, I heard the rant slightly, but did you eventually get to vote?" And when we left the broadcast and I came back to Goodwood, we were literally standing till like 8:15 at night outside the polling station. But what I found was that there were several people in these queues that I had encountered, so-called whites with ANC T-shirts, clearly giving us an indication of who they would be voting for. And there was also a contingent of local residents from Goodwood who were dressed in EFF, not regalia, but red T-shirt with the symbols linked to the economic freedom fighters, and that kind of like gave me an impression. Whoa, I've been in Goodwood for close on 20 years. I've never quite seen this, but this shows me the type of diversity that we're heading into. Maybe this would be a good learning curve now for Al Jamaa as a Muslim political party, for them also maybe to look at diversity. Now, for the first time, Al Jamaa would have 2 seats in the National Assembly through the Honorable Hanif Hendricks and Advocate Shamima Sali. So perhaps, yes, having the ethos as a Muslim party, but reaching out to multi denominations and saying, look, yes, our ethos is Islamic, it is Muslim, but by the same token, there are humanitarian benefits from this ethos that we represent. And maybe they find a way of also diversifying and maybe then grow their constituencies also.
One thing that's I find so interesting about South African politics is, the more we progress in becoming more sophisticated as a political and as a democracy, basically, we also kind of still sit with the scars of pre 1994, I think. And there's a lot of reference to apartheid. There's a lot of reference to the trauma suffered by people and the results of that. So you kind of also, I imagine, take that away from a people who've gone through and experienced it, at a certain level, and then come back and say, well, okay, fine, let's just move on and Bianchi Dori and
Yeah.
let's forget about it. But at the same time, also, I think the other thing that's so important is that when it comes to you've spoken about Al Jamaa as a party. um, I think smaller parties need to start defining their message. They need to start looking at their message, and they need to start looking at the interests of the electorate, or of the voters, so that they can get a better understanding of what message would suit the audience that they're targeting. I think that is the skill that parties that have gained in this past election. They have been able to target specific issues. They've targeted specific demographics, but they've brought the interests of the people to bear in their discussions, and that is, I think, what people want to hear and what people liked and what activated them to vote. So I think from a point of view of someone who likes to see development within a message, I think this is the opportunity for smaller parties like Al Jama and others to sit back, reassess their message and reassess the audience, and go back and do the work.
What I find also interesting, if we are focusing perhaps just on culture and diversity, legacy, and history, there were a few very interesting comments coming from Minister Patricia de Lille, Minister of Tourism in the country. She she spoke of the rich cultural heritage at the Cape, and here perhaps this
Mm.
would assimilate to the beliefs of Muslims, where she said that a stronger call has to be made, and she is going to echo this from the tourism portfolio first, where the rich contributions by the Malayu and Java slaves coming to the Cape over 350 years ago. She believes a stronger um, indication of their contributions should be made and given in the curricula, and we need to look at also redeveloping that and redefining it. She also talked about the contributions made by the late Sheikh Abu Bakr Effendi, Allah yarham, and his contributions that he made. And she said she's making a decided effort to engage with heritage and ensure that this diversified history is also found and ratified in our curriculum.
Look, I think within this community, there have been a lot of complaints around culture and heritage, and how people feel abused in terms of their culture being in a sense put on display, but not really being honored,
Mm.
as the owners of that culture and that heritage. An example of that is, and some people will talk about, someone in Bukap, for instance, taking pictures of people's homes and standing on their stoops,
Mm.
and posing in front of someone else's home, kind of in a sense just claiming that space in that moment, because they're tourists. And the reality of it is, and someone saying, well, but that's someone's home. Is
Yes.
there no remuneration for the fact that you decided to step on my stoop and take a picture? Or sometimes even people walking to other people's homes and taking pictures and stuff. So there is this sentiment amongst people that, you know um that some people do feel left out of this discussion around heritage. When we talk about it, we like to talk about it in the concept of diversity.
Mm.
This is how diverse we are. Look at the beautiful heritage, and they make beautiful covers and pictures of culture and heritage in South Africa. But when we have the hard conversations around what that means, how that translates, and how that benefits people in this country who are sharing their culture with the world.
Mm.
So I'm glad that Patricia de Lille has seen the value and the contribution of particularly, for instance, the Malay community, if we have to use that example, and how we as South Africans, how they add value to South Africa, and how we can entrench that sense of culture.
Do you think it would come down to us firstly owning this diversity of exactly who we are,
Of course.
and how this diversity actually adds to the collective of South Africa? Because if we speak South Africa, we have to speak of Poikikos, we have to speak of the Kusistas, we have to speak about the Samosas, we have to speak about um, uh, Pap and Vleis. All these things that we're just talking culinary delicatessens. So is it a question of us having to firstly claim ownership of that diversity first, and being comfortable firstly with who you are, so you can naturally sell it to the rest of the country and the world?
I think definitely we have to be comfortable with who we are, and this also comes down to young people, to the youth, because there's also the sad reality of culture drain out of societies as we become more globalized. We adopt new cultures and new ways of thinking, and sometimes we let go of those values and principles that were taught to us by the older generation that helped us develop and grow and nurture a society that is as vibrant as it is today. So definitely there's something to look at, and I think also to a certain degree, approaching culture and heritage as in a sense, a means and a starting point for us to recognize our differences and also recognize how similar we are. Because at the end of the day, culture, as much as we are diverse in our culture, there are certain elements that tie us together, and there are certain elements that bind us in terms of the fact that we all come from the soil. We're all South Africans, and I think if South Africa gets that right, to understand that we are all South Africans, we'll be able to change the world.
Mm. I think talking about the fact that we are all South Africans, I'm looking at several steps taken by our new Minister of Sport, Arts and Culture, the Honourable
Drifting.
Drifting and stance. He's even talking about making yoga popular again. But amongst others, we know that the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture has been beset by corruption for many, many years. And hence, SASCOC has never really been operational from a financial
Mm.
perspective, although guilty also as a party to the corruption found within DSAC. But I think the steps taken, how long before Minister Gayton McKenzie, as the head of DSAC, how long before he's going to be reined in and said, hang on, you've gone quite far actually, you're doing quite a bit, this is a marathon, it's not a race. But I believe what he is doing is shedding light on problems that have existed in that particular portfolio for over 20 years. And he has been warned on numerous occasions that if he does go down this rabbit hole, it's going to be literally like going down the rabbit hole of the Road Accident Fund, the National Lottery Fund, and then also SASCOC, beset and fraught with corruption, misappropriation. So, will he find this talk that he's walking, that as he continues along this trajectory and journey of wanting to rectify all the wrongs in this department, that it's going to become a very difficult task?
I think that sometimes politicians need to realize that when you get into politics, you're going to deal with politics.
Yes.
And so ultimately, I think that's the challenge that faces everyone. Anyone who wants to, and whether Gayton wants to do good or not, is not something that I can speak on. I
Yes.
can say he's enthusiastic. That's what I can say. But any person coming into government to do good is going to deal with red tape. Enough red tape to tie them up for 5 years. And the reality of that is, how much can we do? How much, especially now in a diverse government that we have now, a government of national unity with different opinions on matters. People asking the question: how long will this government of unity stay together? How long
Yes.
will they be united? Until we start debating the bigger issues, until people want to have more of a say and have more of their opinion shared. We've already seen the spats between the DA and the ANC in terms of positions within party and influence and power that we see a party wanting to exert, even though we're not in the majority.
Yes.
Also, as we talk, we're hearing the cannons which are stationed behind us at the
Castle
castle.
of Good Hope.
With the president taking his place on the podium, you can probably see that on the live stream. Yeah, that's of course very close to the Madiba statue that you were speaking about early on. We Madiba, addressed thousands on the parade. So yeah, 21 gun salute honoring the president. I think the flyover will happen, but it's quite dark actually.
It is.
So will we see the planes? That's the other thing, and of course the parliamentary guard, standing guard in a sense, in front of the president. So yeah, we are out about 12 minutes out from the actual speech. One thing, Mohammed Junaid, is we've seen the EFF over the number of years, making their voices heard, disruptors within the chambers. So this time around, are you expecting? I mean, Anders haven't really spoken about this, but are we expecting some kind of statement, in this particular address?
I believe the economic freedom fighters were quizzed on this on a number of occasions when the country learned that the EFF would be excluded from the government of national unity. So the immediate question was, so where to from here now? And what I find very interesting with the EFF was in 2019, they garnered a significant amount of votes, which they were not able to understand, qualify politically. Little did they know, Julius Malema and Floyd Jivambu, they did some homework, and they found that when President Cyril Ramaphosa assumed office in 2019, there were several members within the ANC and various constituencies who were not happy with his appointment and with the removal of ex-President Jacob Zuma. They then felt that they found a home within the EFF. And consequently, in 2019, they were saying that in two provinces alone, and that was KZN and it was Limpopo province, they literally found a migration of over 345,000 votes that had come over to the EFF. And back then, they were not able to explain how this was the case. And when MK Party was then launched in December and they got close to 15% of the votes on May 29th, that is when the EFF think tank actually did some reconnaissance, and they found that those votes that they captured back then was actually disenfranchised ANC members who now then found a home within the MK. So that is the reason why we did not see major trajectory growth for the EFF with the past concluded general elections. But then Malema was asked at several press conferences, so what is going to be your plan of action now? Because we've known the EFF to disrupt proceedings, whether it is State of the Nation address or the budget speech or the opening of Parliament. You've done it over the years in a 10-year period. And he's said it and they've repeated it now consistently. So let's wait and see. And they said that they will engage now as the opposition constructively. They will not disrupt proceedings. They will engage constructively. And if there's no meaningful redress, they will then peacefully take to the streets and engage with the masses to ensure that the masses know what exactly is transpiring and decisions that are being made are not in their best interest. So it remains to be seen. It's going to be very interesting because we've become accustomed to the EFF disrupting proceedings. They probably will not do it tonight. I doubt it. If they do, I'll be very surprised.
One interesting thing about that is, and the VSC journalists will be able to tell you, when the proceedings get disrupted, sometimes for 45 minutes or even longer, I imagine, then, it makes the job of the, of the media harder because they're going to stay longer here
Yes.
to actually get the last of the speech. But we do also understand that there are certain important issues that need to be, put on the table. So this is the time when the eyes of the country are on the president, and so this is the time people choose to make those statements. As we're speaking, I know there's about 8 more minutes left. The parliamentary guard is marching off from the venue, and the president has gone inside, I think, to the chambers, City Hall, of course, which now is Parliament precinct, and very shortly we will be getting underway with that speech. The one thing that I always find interesting is that, look, I know that as South Africa, as a democratic country, we still hold on to these, certain practice and principles, like the symbol of the mace being carried into the
Yes.
chambers, right? And I look at this and I see that semblances of our political system, but also of how we conduct parliament is similar to that of, for instance, Britain and how they and how their system is set up. And I ask myself the question: is there a way where eventually we transition into a more African representation of what parliament looks like? Because we do kind of borrow a little bit from Europe.
We do. Do you think that we will
And
ever?
there's the mace.
Yeah, exactly what you were talking about. Will we ever see that day, perhaps, as President Ramaphosa enters the House now officially? But will we see that day if the country reverts back to a more black consciousness form of policy and politics? When we see a landscape like that, because the ANC perhaps had a choice to form a coalition with the MK Party and the EFF. Many people perhaps misconstrue and misunderstand the concept of the EFF talking about a borderless country. No, they're not directly saying that for everyone just to come in, because then you would have Minister Gaten McKenzie up in arms, but he is now running the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture. But it does not literally mean that. It means we are African in nature, we are African in unity, and the African civilizations for for hundreds of years and millennia have been known to be guided by the principle of Ubuntu for the collective.
Indeed. As we speak about, South African identity, the praise
So
singer
it is, yes.
becomes a very important part of these proceedings as he jazzes up the president, he gasses him up, as they say these
Mm.
days, in the public, and talks about his experiences, and talks about the amazing and great things that he's done. I think right now what we're going to do is hand over for that broadcast. Yeah, you'll some of that praise singing, and then of course thereafter the sitting will commence, and we'll get the speaker will call upon the president to address the crowd. So of course we're streaming this live on YouTube and Facebook. You can pick up on the stream and share your views on the comments as we cover the opening of Parliament address for 2024, the 18th of July, the first joint sitting, and of course the first time that this government of national unity will commence with proceedings in this way.
Was very short. I hope you did pray at home before coming here. Honorable members, the President has called this joint sitting of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces in terms of Section 84, subsection 2D of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, read with Joint Rule 14 to deliver the opening of Parliament address. I now call the Honorable the President to address the joint sitting.
Thank you. Let's be seated, please. Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, Honorable Togo Didiza, Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Honorable Refilwe Mtsweni Tsipane, Deputy President Paul Mashatile, former President Thabo Mbeki, former Deputy President Baleka Mbete, former Deputy President Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, former Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Honorable Amos Masondo, Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, Deputy Chief Justice Mandisa Maya, Executive Mayor of Cape Town, Mr. Gordon Lewis, Hill Lewis, the various heads of institutions supporting democracy here present, esteemed member of the Order of Inkamanga, Umama Dr. Esther Mahlanga, distinguished guests and eminent persons, members of the Diplomatic Corps, honorable members of Parliament.
and fellow South Africans. We gather here this evening in the province of the Western Cape in the sad aftermath of ferocious and unforgiving storms that have caused damage to homes, businesses, and infrastructure, affecting tens of thousands of people across the province. In recent days, we have witnessed runaway fires in KwaZulu-Natal, in which 14 people, including 6 firefighters, lost their lives. The fires also caused destruction of homes, livestock, and grazing fields. I spoke to the 2 premiers of our provinces earlier today, Honorable Ntuli and Honorable Winde, and informed them that the thoughts of South Africans are with all those people who have been subjected to these terrible weather conditions as they work to recover and rebuild their lives. I have asked honorable members, the Speaker of the National Assembly, and the Chairperson of the Council of Provinces to convene this joint sitting to formally open Parliament on a day that is full of meaning and significance in the lives of not only South Africans, but many people around the world. Today, we celebrate the birth of the founding father of our nation and democracy, and a global icon of peace, justice, and reconciliation, President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. Across our country and across the world, millions of people are marking this day with deeds of service and solidarity. Through their actions, they are giving life to a fundamental truth that we derive our humanity from the humanity of others. Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. Mutu kimutu ngabantu. Mutu ndi mutu ngabantu. Munu imunu ibanu bangwane. We are reminded of this day that we have a responsibility to each other, and that our well-being and our happiness cannot be separated from those of our fellow citizens, men and women, not only of our country, but of the world. Fellow citizens, we are reminded, men and women, not only of our country, but of our fellow citizens, we are reminded, men and women, to ensure that no one is left behind. We, South Africans, are a diverse nation, a nation with different histories, different beliefs, cultures, and languages. Yet we are one people, and we share a common destiny. It is this common destiny that the people of South Africa have charged this Parliament and this government to consolidate and advance their destiny. Exactly 50 days ago, the people of South Africa went to the polls to decide the future of our country. Ahead of the elections, they had expressed their concerns and their hopes, their wishes, as well as their expectations. Through their votes, they determined that the leaders of our country should set aside their political differences and come together as one to overcome the severe challenges that confront our nation. They sent a clear message that without unity, cooperation, and partnership, our efforts to end poverty, unemployment, and inequality will not succeed. Guided by this directive from the people of our country, Political parties from across the political spectrum have elected to establish a government of national unity. In an act that is unprecedented in our democratic history, 10 political parties represented here in our parliament have agreed to craft a common program to build a better, more equal, and more just South Africa. They have come together despite their differences, and differences they have. They came together because they share a commitment to a nation that is united, prosperous, and inclusive. Through a statement of intent, these parties have made a firm commitment to respect the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa and the rule of law, and to promote accountability, transparency, integrity, and good governance. They have agreed to a minimum program as the foundation of the work of the government of national unity. The priority actions that arise from this minimum program received the full support of the recent Cabinet Lekgotla, which was held recently, which brought together newly appointed ministers, deputy ministers, and premiers from all our provinces. It also brought together local government representatives as represented in SALGA, directors general, and other key officials were also in attendance. These are the primary actions that we outline this evening that they decided on. Cabinet will be convening a further strategy session to consider the minimum term development plan, having moved from the medium term strategic plan, framework rather, the development plan which will translate the priorities that these parties have agreed to into a detailed plan, as well as the interventions that government will implement over the next 5 years. The medium-term development plan will set out a well-defined vision and strategic plan that outlines clear goals and includes specific, measurable objectives and a roadmap for achieving them. These goals will be properly aligned with the budget, which will support the implementation of these objectives. In all this work, the National Development Plan Vision 2030 remains the defining blueprint for our country's growth and development. We also draw inspiration from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the African Union's Agenda 2063 in crafting our medium-term development plan. The Cabinet Lekgotla underscored the determination of all members of the Government of National Unity to work together to advance the interests of all South Africans without pursuing and promoting party political interests. It is about putting the people of South Africa first and foremost and advancing their interests. The Lekgotla noted with appreciation the commitment and great enthusiasm with which the newly appointed ministers and deputy ministers, as well as our premiers, have embarked on their duties. We will have seen many of them going throughout the country, immediately embarking on their tasks and outlining what their plans are. And some with great excitement and some expressing their joy at having been appointed. And we all should rejoice as we see them. Honorable members, despite the achievement of 30 years of democracy and the work undertaken over the last 5 years to rebuild our economy and our society, millions of South Africans remain poor, unemployed, and they live in a highly unequal society. For a decade and a half, our economy has barely grown. The circumstances of the people of South Africa today requires that we act together as the Government of National Unity, as well as all key role players in our country, and that we act with urgency, boldly and decisively. The Government of National Unity has resolved to dedicate the next 5 years to actions that will advance 3 strategic priorities. Firstly, to drive inclusive growth and job creation. Secondly, to reduce poverty and tackle the high cost of living. And thirdly, to build a capable, ethical, and developmental state. We have decided to place inclusive economic growth at the center of the work of the Government of National Unity and at the top of our national agenda. Our experience over the past 30 years has shown that when our economy grows, jobs are created. When our economy contracts, there is no job creation, and in fact, some jobs are lost. The Government of National Unity will pursue every action that contributes to sustainable, rapid economic growth and remove every obstacle that stands in the way of growth. We are determined that growth must be inclusive and that growth must also be transformational. Inclusive growth must drive the redistribution of wealth as well as opportunity. It must support the empowerment of Black South Africans and women and all those who in the past had been relegated to the fringes of our nation's economy. This is part of the constitutional imperative to redress the imbalances of the past and deal with the slow process of development. Through empowerment and transformation, we can ensure that the skills, the capabilities, resources, and energies of all South Africans are used to the greatest effect. We will continue to pursue the programs that encourage broad-based Black economic empowerment, employment equity, and support to small and medium-sized enterprises. We will continue to protect and uphold the rights of workers and continually strive to improve the conditions in which they work and live. Inclusive growth demands that we affirm the position of the women of our country and the young people in the economy of our country. Inclusive growth requires that we remove the social, economic, and cultural and other barriers to the full participation of persons with disabilities and other vulnerable groups in our country. We will support the growth of rural enterprises and invest in public infrastructure in underserviced areas across our land. We will increase funding to land reform, prioritize the transfer of state land, and improve post-settlement support by strengthening the institutional capacity of responsible structures. To achieve rapid, inclusive growth, we will need to fix our struggling municipalities. Growth happens at a local level where our people live and work. Our municipalities must become both the providers of social services and facilitators of inclusive economic growth. They must work to attract investment in their areas. This approach can encourage businesses to expand and create more jobs in municipal areas. Investors are generally attracted to areas that have reliable and modern infrastructure. Simplifying and speeding up planning and regulatory processes can make it easier for businesses to invest and operate in a municipality, and this often leads to the creation of more and more jobs. As the national government, we have both a constitutional responsibility and a clear electoral mandate to assist municipalities in the effective exercise of their powers as well as their functions. We will ensure that the institutional structure and funding model for local government is fit for purpose and that municipalities are financially and operationally sustainable. Now, this we will do because our municipalities have been raising this over and over again. We will put in place systems to ensure that capable and qualified people are appointed to senior positions in municipalities and ensure independent regulation and oversight. As an immediate priority, we will also bring stability to governance in our metros and restore the delivery of services. Many of our metros have faced huge challenges that need to be attended to. We have already begun with this work. When I visited eThekwini Metro earlier this year, I met with the residents of the city, with local business leaders and municipal officials. They told me that they wanted to work together to build a city that they could be proud of again. We've put in place the eThekwini Presidential Working Group to enhance support from national and provincial government to turn the metro administration around and to fix the problems that they are facing in relation to infrastructure, water, sanitation, and also to focus on attracting new investment. This we shall do because eThekwini or Durban needs to be restored to its former glory, and this we should do. We will extend the same approach to other metropolitan cities that face serious challenges so that our cities can become engines of growth and become dynamic centers of opportunities for our people. In the next 5 years, working together as the government of national unity, drawing on our collective capabilities, we will forge a new inclusive growth path for South Africa by pursuing a massive investment in infrastructure. Significant projects are already underway around the country in areas such as transport, roads, water in the form of building dams, energy, and human settlements. We will massively increase the scale of investments in infrastructure through a more holistic and integrated approach, positioning Infrastructure South Africa as a central institution of coordination and planning. We are continuing to simplify the regulations on public-private partnerships. This process had stalled for a number of years, and we are now earnest and focused in simplifying this very way of engendering good infrastructure investment to enable greater investment in both social and economic infrastructure development. From our largest metros to our deepest rural areas, we have a clear intention to turn our country into a construction site. We want to see yellow equipment, yes, throughout our country, and cranes and roads being built, as well as dams, as well as bridges, houses, schools, hospitals, including broadband fiber that will be laid out as new power lines are installed. We must work to engender a culture of maintenance of public infrastructure and dedicate resources and establish systems to ensure this. Now, the culture of maintaining our infrastructure has declined over a number of years. We build infrastructure facilities and leave the maintenance thereof to a time when they have started to debilitate and collapse. Part of the process must be engendering a culture of maintaining right from the day they have been put in place. Now, as the Government of National Unity, we are resolved to intensify our investment drive, encouraging and enabling businesses to invest in productive capacity. These investments will lead to increased employment creation for unemployed South Africans, especially for young people. We will drive growth in labor-intensive sectors, such as services, as it is happening now, and agriculture, which has a great potential to create jobs. Our menu... Yes, agriculture. Our manufacturing capability has declined over years. We do need to re-industrialize our country and make sure that we can create more and more jobs out of quite a number of sectors of our economy. To create more jobs for South Africans, we will also focus on processing our minerals so that we export finished products rather than raw commodities. It is actually quite sad to see us continuing to ship out rock, soil, and dust out of the ports of our country, and yet we can process a number of these minerals and ensure that we export processed products, finished products. That is what we will be focusing on. We will pursue a smart industrial policy that focuses on the competitiveness of our economy and that incentivizes businesses to expand our exports and to create jobs. We will continue to work with stakeholders to develop and implement master plans to grow important industries, to increase investment, to create jobs and foster transformation. Now, we will also review the various master plans that we have to see whether they're becoming as effective as we had envisaged. We are convinced that small, medium enterprises and the informal sector hold the greatest potential for inclusive growth and job creation. We will pay particular attention to supporting small and medium-sized enterprises in our townships, in our rural areas, and in areas that need focus. We will take economic activity to where most of our people live so that more and more jobs can be created. Red tape debilitates the creation of jobs. Every department and every public entity has been directed to reduce the undue regulatory burdens that hold back businesses from creating jobs. And this is an area that our ministers will focus on in the areas of their work, so that the various entities and the various structures of government ensure that the regulatory burden that we often impose on businesses must be eliminated so that our businesses can thrive and be profitable and create more jobs. We have demonstrated the value of public and social employment in creating immediate work and livelihood opportunities for many of our people. The Presidential Employment Stimulus, the expanded Public Works Program, and other initiatives under the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention have provided income, work experience, and skills development opportunities to many of our people, particularly young people and women. We will expand and institutionalize these programs so that more and more young people can participate in job opportunities and skills development. Now, through the Presidential Employment Stimulus, we have been able to create nearly 2 million work and livelihood opportunities. Yes, this is true. If you go to our schools, 25,000 of them benefited from the deployment of young people who came in as teacher assistants. Through this program, they gained a lot of experience, they gained a lot of know-how, and they got into the world of work. And many of them are now better equipped to be able to operate in the world of work. We see great potential for growth beyond our borders. As we strengthen economic diplomacy with our largest trading partners and potential trading partners, we will prioritize the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area to increase our exports to the rest of our continent. The rest of our continent is actually a wide open opportunity for South African businesses. As one goes around the continent, you often see products from other continents outside of our own. And this can be a real good opportunity for South African businesses. Sometimes as one goes around, you even see water imported from Europe, from Asia. And one often asks oneself, why can't this be done on the African continent? And this is an opportunity for the most industrialized nation on the continent to export to the rest of the continent. We will do this as part of our foreign policy approach, which promotes peace, security, democracy, and development across Africa and advances a more just and inclusive world order. Over the next 5 years, we will seize the enormous opportunity in renewable energy for inclusive growth. South Africa has some of the best solar and wind resources in the world. As we undertake a just transition towards renewable energy, our country must create a green manufacturing sector centered on the export of green hydrogen and associated products. We must move into electric vehicles and renewable energy components. We have seen, for example, how the Northern Cape has already attracted billions of rands of investment in renewable energy projects. Work is underway to set up a special economic zone in Bochubai to drive investment in green hydrogen energy projects. We have already a huge pipeline of renewable energy projects representing over 22,500 megawatts of new generating capacity, estimated to be worth around 400 billion rand in new investment. Investments such as these will inevitably create more jobs. Just this week, we saw the largest private energy project connect to the grid near Lichtenburg in the Northwest Province, with over 390,000 solar panels that will add 256 megawatts to the national grid. We will see more of these projects taking shape across the country in the months and years to come. As these investments reach fruition, more jobs will be created. Our Just Energy Transition investment plan sets out a clear path to invest more than 1.3 trillion rand in a just transition, including support for workers and communities in Mpumalanga and other coal-producing regions. Our country is undergoing a renewable energy revolution that is expected to be the most significant driver of growth and job creation in the next decade and beyond. We also have a unique opportunity to position our country as a major player in the digital economy and create jobs in digital services. We will invest in digital identity and payments, expand access to affordable broadband, and increase training for young people in digital skills. As we pursue these new areas of growth, we will continue with the far-reaching reforms that enable growth. At the same time, we will launch our second phase of Operation Vulindlela, a government-wide initiative that has been essential in supporting and driving reform. It resides in the presidency, and the Treasury and the presidency are hard at work to lead the reform process in our country. But more importantly, it is a process that has seen to the breaking down of silos in government, where various government departments cooperate together to ensure that we drive the reforms that we have embarked upon. In its second phase, Operation Vulindlela will focus on reforming the local government system and improving the delivery of basic services, and harnessing digital public infrastructure as a driver of growth and inclusion. It will also focus on accelerating the release of public land for social housing and redirecting our housing policy to enable people to find affordable homes in areas of their choice. We will complete the most consequential transformation of South Africa's electricity industry in more than a century. Since the announcement of the Energy Action Plan that I announced here in Parliament in July 2022, we've made tremendous progress also in reducing the severity of load shedding that beset our country for a long time. Now, over the next 5 years, government will focus on expanding and strengthening the transmission network, the electricity transmission network that needs a great deal of expansion, but that also requires quite a lot of investment. To drive inclusive growth, we need an efficient freight rail network to carry our minerals, our agricultural produce, and manufactured goods to market. Through the implementation of the Freight Logistics Roadmap, we will continue with reforms to transform South Africa's freight logistics system. Now, the work that we are doing with business and unions through the National Logistics Crisis Committee has already contributed to improvements in the operational performance of freight rail and ports. The well-being of our people and growth of our economy depends on another important issue, which is water. South Africa is a water-scarce country, and our water security is threatened by historical underinvestment in bulk water resources and distribution infrastructure. We will therefore continue with the institutional reforms in the water sector to enable greater investment in bulk water infrastructure and better regulation of water services and sources across the country. And this will involve, yes, the building of the dams whose construction in a number of areas in our country is already underway, and ensuring that reticulation also takes place as we build these dams. Just as business needs water and electricity to operate, a growing economy needs skills. Where the skills we need are not immediately available, we need to attract people with the appropriate qualifications and experience to come and bolster our efforts. Now, in doing this, we will continue with the visa reforms that we introduced in the last few years to attract skills, but more importantly, to also attract investment, and also with a view of growing our tourism sector that is so important. And we will continue to pursue a macroeconomic policy that supports growth and development in a stable and sustainable manner. Like many other countries, we have had to borrow money to support our budgetary requirements. We will manage public finances with a view to stabilizing debt. We are firmly committed, to steadily reducing the cost of servicing our debt so that we can redirect funds towards other critical social and economic needs. Our second strategic priority as the Government of National Unity is to tackle poverty and the high cost of living. An effective, integrated, and comprehensive poverty alleviation strategy is necessary to provide protection and support to the most vulnerable in our society. Even at a time when many companies are making large profits, millions of South Africans are suffering as a result of rising prices of everything they buy. As the Government of National Unity, we will look to expand the basket of essential food items exempt from VAT, and undertake a comprehensive review of administered prices, including, yes, the fuel price formula, to identify and this we did for a while. When the prices of fuel just kept on rising, we were able to find a way in which we could stabilize the price. We will seek to find ways of addressing this challenge. Asset poverty is one of the underlying causes of abject poverty in our country, and this exacerbates the high cost of living amongst our people. The provision of title deeds for land and housing provides people with assets that they can use to improve their economic position. Income poverty is also one of the underlying causes of poverty. The best way to deal with poverty is for people to have jobs. We have, however, made interventions to support the unemployed through a variety of interventions, including during COVID, when we introduced the SRD grant. The SRD grant has provided a lifeline to millions of South Africans who are unemployed. We will use this grant as a basis as we move on for the introduction of a sustainable form of income support for unemployed people to address the challenge of income poverty. We must ensure that local governments properly implement the indigent policy so that the old, the infirm, and the poor are able to get assistance with the payment of basic services. Now, this is important. And importantly, we will link social assistance with other forms of support to lift people out of poverty. As a country, we need to appreciate the impact that a well-functioning and quality education system has on both reducing poverty and driving inclusive economic growth. We will therefore focus on achieving universal access to early childhood development, which is a prerequisite. And this, honorable members, is a prerequisite for improved learning in later years. We will ensure schools are conducive to deliver good education with enough classrooms, safe and appropriate sanitation facilities, clean water, and a daily meal for those children who attend our schools. To ensure that we produce the skills that our economy needs, we will expand vocational and technical training in schools and post-school institutions. And in this regard, we will seek to take a demand-led approach to skills development. An important task of the next 5 years is to ensure that we also reduce the high cost of living through ensuring that everyone in South Africa has equal access to equitable, accessible, and affordable quality healthcare. As we implement the National Health Insurance, we will focus on strengthening healthcare infrastructure, which many people during the debate and discussions on the NHI have said we should focus on. We will also improve the training of healthcare professionals and use technology to improve healthcare management. Now, while there is much contestation around the NHI, there is broad agreement that we must draw on the resources and capabilities of both the public and private sectors to meet the healthcare needs of all South Africans equally. In implementing the NHI, we are confident that we will be able to bring stakeholders together and that we will be able to resolve differences and clarify misunderstandings. Now, as the Government of National Unity, we have agreed that we will seek to build consensus around issues that we may not agree on. And there are a number of issues that we agree on. What unites us, we are united around many issues. And there are issues which we still need to find full agreement on. And yes, we will work hard to make sure that we do find agreement. Now, with so many people living far from economic opportunities and services, transport costs take up a large portion of many of our people's income and drive up the cost of living. We often hear reports that many of our people spend up to 40, 50% of their income just on transport. An immediate priority is therefore to complete the recovery of the passenger rail network across the country to enable people to travel from outlying areas to cities at an affordable rate. Around 80% of commuter rail corridors are now back into operation, and nearly 300 vandalized stations have been refurbished, providing safer and more efficient services to commuters. The third strategic priority of the Government of National Unity is to build a capable, ethical, and developmental state. We will proceed with the work already underway to professionalize the public service, ensuring that we attract into the state people with skills and capabilities. And I need to pause for a minute here that as the Government of National Unity, key people who are appointed into positions of ministers and deputy ministers, as they got into the office, the public service officials have managed this transition period extremely well, and I want to thank them for doing so. We will continue to fight corruption and prevent undue political interference in our administration of the state. In this administration, we will complete the work to restore the financial position and operational performance of our state-owned enterprises. We will complete the implementation of a new centralized ownership model for our state-owned enterprises. This will improve accountability, transparency, governance, and oversight, while reducing inefficiency and the potential for corruption. The establishment of a state-owned SOE holding company will give us even greater capacity, apart from everything else that this will benefit us for. It will give us greater capacity to build a sovereign wealth fund. This has been done successfully by other countries whose sovereign wealth funds have built up capital from the high performance of their state-owned enterprises rather than from the fiscus. So this is an important move. Now, to tackle crime and corruption, we must have capable, sophisticated, and independent law enforcement agencies that can fight complex and organized crime. We will deploy modern technology to assist crime fighting. A data-driven approach will be used to identify violent crime hotspots and inform the allocation of policing resources alongside prevention measures. We will continue to tackle priority crimes like illegal mining, gang violence, cash and transit heists, and the construction mafia through specialized police units. Now, we will continue to implement the National Strategic Plan on gender-based violence and femicide. And we will expand victim support services like the Tutuzela centers and GBV desks in police stations. Now, 30 years ago, President Nelson Mandela stood before this House to reflect on the first 100 days of the first government of national unity. Recognizing the different views of the diverse parties within that government of national unity, he said, "What brings us together is the overriding commitment to a joint national effort to reconcile our nation and to improve its well-being." Close quotes. The same may be said of this government of national unity that has now been established by 10 of the parties represented in this parliament. We share a commitment to reconcile our nation by advancing social justice and equal prosperity for all. We are committed to improve the well-being of our country and its people through inclusive growth, the creation of jobs, and the reduction of poverty. This is an undertaking that should involve all of us. On the occasion of the presidential inauguration, I made a commitment that we should work together to hold a national dialogue, to discuss the critical challenges facing our country, and to agree on what we all need to do to achieve a better future for this great country. Across society, people, organizations, foundations, and you name them, have expressed their support for a national dialogue. They have said it should involve all key stakeholders in the life of our country, representing civil society, traditional leaders, faith-based sector, labor, business, cultural workers, sports people, and other formations representing the diverse interests and voices of our citizens. Following the example set by historic events such as the Congress of the People in 1955, the Conference for a Democratic Future in 1989, and the CODESA talks in the early 90s, and drawing on the experience of writing our Constitution in 1996, we envisage a national dialogue that involves extensive and inclusive public participation. As we have done at many important moments in our history, we will seek to forge a common vision and build a comprehensive social compact with a clear program of action to realize our people's aspirations for this beautiful country. Through this national dialogue, we are called to be agents of change, to be champions of inclusive growth, to be the creators of opportunity for all our people. A few years ago, a diverse group of partners and stakeholders from across society came together to consider various scenarios for the future of our country. These were called the Indlulamiti Scenarios 2035. One of the scenarios that they painted and described was called the recrimination nation, using the image of the bird, the loud hadida, as its symbol. This described a situation of inaction where our country's problems go unresolved and where everyone blames each other for South Africa's ills. This scenario painted a picture of our country going into decline. The second scenario that they painted and described symbolized a vulture. This painted a picture of a desperate nation governed by a populist coalition whose main objective is self-enrichment and patronage. Now, this scenario which seems to excite people so much, this scenario saw investment confidence being eroded, the growth path being low, and unemployment and poverty and inequality remaining extremely high. These fellow South Africans also described a scenario they called the cooperation nation, which was symbolized by social weaver beds. This scenario paints a picture where after disruptions and protests, there is a coming together of political parties, the state, the private sector, labor, civil society, coming together in order to jointly identify priorities and leveraging the strength of each. There is change as this scenario plays itself out in the form of governance and reform that leads to the economy growing with more investment attracted, leading to the reduction of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. By establishing the government of national unity, by preparing, yes, for this national dialogue I've spoken about, we have deliberately set ourselves along the path towards a cooperation nation. That's where we want to go. And we would like all of us as South Africans to behave like weaver beds. Weavers are amongst the most efficient and gregarious birds in that they build complex structures together, but more importantly, they cooperate. And this is the way we should go. Despite all the challenges, despite our differences, despite all the headwinds that we have faced, as South Africans, we are called upon to remain firmly committed to pursue the path of cooperation, of growth and inclusion. We are called upon to behave like weaver beds, building nests and building this big South African nest that will be able to sustain all the people of our country. Earlier today, a group of South Africans, of South African climbers, reached the summit of Kilimanjaro. Now, as we know, this is the highest peak on our beloved continent. They did so in honor of the birth of the father of our nation, Nelson Mandela, and to celebrate the 30th anniversary of our freedom. This effort that they got involved in, or they are involved in, is called or known as Trek for Mandela expedition. Now, these climbers have been joined by other climbers from several countries around the world to help keep girls in school by raising funds for sanitary products and other needs. Now, this is an important part. And what they have done symbolizes what we should all take as an inspiration. Let their actions inspire us all. Let their achievement of reaching the summit of Kilimanjaro remind us that as the South African nation, there is no mountain we cannot climb and no peak we cannot reach. One remembers what Nelson Mandela wrote in his long walk to freedom, when he said he had walked and he had had a long walk and he had climbed a number of hills and he reached this top hill and surveyed the beauty of our country and said he should not tarry too long because there are many more hills to climb. As South Africans, we can summit many hills if we work together and we rise together. I want to conclude by referring and paraphrasing the words of Martin Luther King Jr. when he said, "Let us rise up tonight with greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination, and let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make South Africa what it ought to be. We have a great opportunity to make this country a better nation. The coming together of all these parties that have decided to cooperate is quite a historic moment for our country, and we must make the government of national unity work and function and succeed. I am determined, and I've been grateful in talking to all the leaders of these 9 parties. I've been grateful that all of them have, with one voice, said, Mr. President, we want this GNU to work, and we shall make it work. Thank you very much. May God bless South Africa.
President Cyril Ramaphosa as he leaves to a standing ovation. We, of course, I left quite a few questions. Mohammed Junaid Shafiq still joins me. Some very interesting, I think it's a wish list, basically, that the president has laid before the country.
It does sound like a birthday wish list. All the things that you would want and hope for, and the presents get wrapped, and when you receive it, it's not really what you wanted. You cannot return to sender unless you specify. But it's interesting, Fasih, the president started off by clarifying the status of the GNU. saying that through the votes coming from South Africans, you and I, and millions who went to the polls, we spoke. So as a result of what we wanted, we now have a government of national unity.
He's not wrong. Also, in the closing remarks, he was kind of, being very hopeful and optimistic about this government of national unity and how we need to work together to make it work. The reality of that, of course, also is that a lot of things were placed on the table, and the various ministers that we zoomed in on, when these portfolios were mentioned or alluded to. One of the things that came out very starkly is the fact that there is this idea of rebuilding South Africa. We spoke about the fact that we want to strengthen our electricity transmission network. The fact that our freight and logistics systems need to be looked at. Looking at the fact that we want to attract people with skills. And a lot of these things are things that I think generally South Africans wouldn't have a problem with. But the reality of it is, can the people in the National Assembly at this time, do they have the capacity, do they have the the foresight and the unity in the government of national unity to be able to get these things done?
And President Ramaphosa also reflected on what was agreed upon as the president and the cabinet came from the Lekgotla over the past weekend in Pretoria, because he went by actually mentioning what was agreed upon at the Lekgotla, and he accentuates unity, though there was diversity of thought and ideology, but there is a sense of commitment and belonging. We now have a firm commitment more than ever to implement and represent the Constitution through the statement of intent, and this is what South Africans want and what we need. So I think maybe from the perspective of the opening of Parliament address, I think maybe South Africans should now more than ever, when the State of the Nation address does take place, SONA, and when the budget speech is delivered, because here we can speak of what is wrong in the country and what we would like to see have done. So it's sort of like a brainstorming session. So this is what we see wrong, and this is how we're going to address it. But then to look at, okay, the yardstick of what we've achieved and not achieved in a year, and then for the president to speak to the nation at SONA, I think that's going to be key.
Most definitely. And also, I mean, very much appealing to the unity of all those who hold power, in a sense, in the National Assembly, particularly acknowledging the fact that the NHI is a sole issue. That people are differing and people have different views and opinions on the NHI, it's all out, and what it might mean for our healthcare system. But at least saying that there is this level of commitment towards transforming the healthcare system, something that he mentioned quite extensively. And then also another thing, and this speaks to a problem that's become in the last couple of years quite extreme. It's cost South Africans billions, and that of course is the construction mafia. We've seen remnants of that in the Western Cape in terms of developments being held up, and also whether it is businesses, whether it is government rollout of affordable housing. At the end of the day, the question remains, how is government going to roll out the strategy to be able to curb this, because it's a major problem here, not just here, but in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, no, the construction mafia, a major problem, although the president hinted at the fact that we would like to see the country become one huge construction site. And we know our ailing infrastructure, development, progress, we kind of like hinging in between that. We are stuck as a nation either in between the first and second industrial revolution. We should have already been advancing into the spheres of the third industrial revolution. But I think we still have quite a way and a long way to go in as far as catch-up is concerned, because the president says more emphasis needs to be placed on technical education and the advancement of TVET colleges. So that gives us once again the indication that South Africa is still pretty much stuck in the developing phase.
I think he placed a huge emphasis on skills, development of skills within education, as you mentioned, but also just generally attracting the right people. And the educational system will be a key aspect to focus on as we move forward if we want to build a country that becomes self-sustaining in a sense. One of the key things also that comes out of that is if we look at the educational system as is mentioned, one thing that I do not necessarily see is a clear strategy. Again, this is a wish list, and we understand that this is the intention. These are the intentions set out at the beginning of this presidency, at the beginning of this government of national unity. But haven't we also been saying this for the last 10, 15, 20 years in terms of our intent to transform, our intent to develop our educational system, our intent to develop infrastructure, and I think really at the end of the day, did the president speak more to what strategies they would employ around curbing corruption, what strategies they would employ around looking at making sure that there's accountability. He did speak about SOEs, he did speak about state-owned enterprises, and creating a more centralized model for them. But what does it mean if we cannot get to a point of accountability? We're still bailing out these institutions as we speak.
And it is a reality for South Africans. The president mentioned it, that our economy has barely grown over the last decade and a half. It requires urgent attention. Economic growth is key. Yes, we do know that. Job creation is also key. Yes, we're well aware of that. But now more than ever, 30 years into democratization, inflation and unemployment is probably at its worst ever. So something seriously needs to be done.
The president did speak about, the cost of transport. He spoke about, the issues that the ordinary man faces. But again, these are going to be the challenges faced by government. How do we bring down inflation? How do we curb this, rampant escalation of cost in South Africa? How do we ensure that we develop a stable rand, a stable currency in the climate that we are? How do we speed up production in terms of our economy, and I think all of these things right now, we tried it with the ANC as a majority party, and let's see if we can do it with the GNU.
But Fasih, we're talking about the value of the rand. We saw how fragile it was over the last couple of weeks when there was a stalemate, and the ANC and the DA, they were at loggerheads with one another, could not agree to a certain amount of portfolios, etc. And then at one point it appeared as if the DA was walking out on the GNU, and that immediately sent the rand tumbling. Then there was stability when they came back to the table, they reached consensus, and the rand was fairly stable, trading under 18 rand to the dollar. And then with his so-called attempted assassination of Republican candidate Donald Trump, the rand took a tumble immediately. And now with the build-up to President Ramaphosa's opening of Parliament address this week, we saw the rand was fairly stable. So we'd like to see what the rand trades at tomorrow morning, post the OPA.
We're cautiously optimistic. I think that if we look at political parties, this State of the Nation was well received, I think, to a certain degree, because it's early days. And we haven't really fleshed out the issues. You spoke about it, Lekgotla, and there were positive vibes there. But when we get down to the nitty-gritty issues, and it's about, putting pen to paper and understanding what the legislation is going to look like for whatever interests we are going to enact, that I think is going to become the true test. One thing though, and you can perhaps maybe comment on this for me, is when we look at what has been said, when we look at what has been discussed in this hour and maybe 5-minute speech that the president gave, what would you say is the best news, or the good news in a sense? Because I get the sense that this again is another President Cyril Ramaphosa speech to call us to unity, and get us all to believe and put our energies and our hopes behind the country. But what was something at least that he said that maybe inspired you?
You know what I found to be very ironic, for lack of a better word? Before President Ramaphosa entered the house and entered City Hall, he stood on top of the balcony at City Hall, and that was reminiscent We know that it's part of protocol and procedure. But for me, what was very ironic, that he paused there for a moment, and in the background we could actually see images of the late Nelson Mandela, and we were shown 30 years of democracy and the milestone. So is this a way of us as South Africans, having being swept up by this romanticized version of what democracy is? Because to many South Africans, if we talk about democracy, then the name that immediately comes to mind is Nelson Mandela.
I think that it's not the first time we've used the imagery and the Madiba kind of magic that they feel the personality of Madiba brings to these things. They did it when he was alive, and now that he's passed away, also they're trying to rally behind the memory of Madiba. But also at the same time, when we look at that again, South Africans, I think, are past the point of simple gestures, and of simply, using symbols. South Africans want to see change. They want to see that government takes their concerns seriously. They want to see that this is a government that realizes that the decisions they take in Parliament has an impact on the broader society.
Absolutely. One thing that I'm very happy about that President Ramaphosa mentioned during his address was mentioning the immediate priority has to be the stabilization of governance. And here he made reference to local government and service delivery. And then for us as South Africans, we can mention here in case of examples, eThekwini, Limpopo, Eastern Cape. These are areas in South Africa where service delivery, by a large stretch of imagination, has actually become non-existent. We've seen a complete breakdown in service delivery, and that immediately has to be the number one recommendation. Is there needs to be stabilization. So I think with President Ramaphosa mentioning this, I'm very happy, because these are residents that have been suffering for a very long period of time, who do not really know what service delivery is like and about. And if they are experiencing some sort of service delivery, it is completely broken, staggered, and scattered. So I think that does require urgent attention.
That most definitely. We can also speak about the fact that we still have schools with spit toilets.
Yes.
Where the number of kids falling into these spit toilets, a horrible death for a child to experience. And indeed, this becomes more urgent for government. The educational department has not yet, gotten to a point where we can say there are no more, pit toilets in schools, and the end is not in sight in terms of this. And I think this speaks to the basic human dignity, the basic human rights. This speaks to the Constitution and the fact that we as a society, we need to recognize that this is something that's not okay. And South Africans, I think to a certain degree, will hold government accountable for things like this. But as you say, at the end of the day, it does come down to, again, the political will. And let's see if this GNU produces something different in terms of its motivations and in terms of its strategies towards serving people and towards service delivery as well.
I think two important things also that stood out for me during President Ramaphosa's address was, one, he made a clear intention that the focus of the country should be on renewable energy, because we have been lagging for a long period of time. Our reliance on coal in South Africa has become increasingly problematic. That has also increased our carbon footprint, which is, and if we look at the scale of countries that are the most guilty, South Africa is actually climbing the ranks, and not in a positive way. We obviously not competing in no way close to Canada and the United States and Germany, the United Kingdom. These countries are at the forefront of the carbon emissions, are really excessive. But I think that is very important. I hope that this translates into policy, implementation, and action, because we do have the landscape in South Africa where we can actually tap into hydroelectricity as a renewable energy source. Also wind farms, we know that there is focus in that direction, but I believe more can be done, and the same applies to solar energy.
Just finally, I know that solar was a key point of focus in the speech as a way to bolster I think energy reserves in a sense. Not too much was mentioned about ISCOM. Not too much,
No, surprisingly.
not much was mentioned
Mm.
about ISCOM as a whole. Although we were alluding to state-owned enterprises and reining them in. Not much was mentioned about load shedding, but I think also at the same time, the president's trying to remain hopeful, and we don't want the public to, at a time when we're trying to rally the country and we're adding political parties together, we do not want to have a situation where we have to remind them of, load shedding and the impacts thereof. But I think that, this is something that's government's going to have to sit with, for the foreseeable future. Mohammed Junaid, I think it's time for us to wrap it up, but it's been a pleasure being in the van with you.
Wonderful.
Covering this
Same here.
broadcast. And I must say, although we do this all the time, it's an honor to come back here and, provide the service to the listener, to the public. We know what a key role this speech plays in the lives of people. It gives them a sense of direction and understanding of government. And it's just been a pleasure.
It has. Shukran to you, and great engaging with you and the listeners. We have a moral, ethical, and a media responsibility, because if we are literally feeding close to 400,000 listeners, that are loyal followers of Voice of the Cape, then we must deliver. But it's been wonderful.
Thank you so much. All the best. And
Wa alaikum salam.
And of course, to the listener tuning in on YouTube and Facebook, thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, this broadcast has been coming to you live from Parliament Precinct, which is normally the parade, and the City Hall. But indeed, of course, it's been one of those days, one of those speeches, one of those days that I think South Africans are watching very closely what the president has said and how we are going to deliver thereafter. Well, from us, I'm Mohammed Hussein.